Chapter 1: The Graveyard of Half-Done Dreams. In the heart of a city that never stops moving, Sila's studio stood in a haunting silence. It wasn't a place of creation, but a cemetery of unfinished stones. Massive blocks of marble sat in the shadows, some with only a single chisel mark, others half-shaped into faces that seemed to cry out for a completion that would never come. Sila was a man of brilliant sparks, but no fire. He was a master of the first strike, yet a helpless slave to the act of quitting. To him, the hammer felt light on day 1, but by day 20, it weighed 1,000 pounds. His life was a constant, exhausting negotiation with comfort. He lived in the waiting room of destiny, always searching for that perfect, elusive, right mood, a ghost that promised inspiration, but delivered only delay. While the world moved forward, Sila remained a king of a kingdom made of dust and broken promises. Chapter 2: The Rhythm of the Mountain. To escape the silent judgment of his ruined dreams, Sila retreated into the vast, ancient mountains. There, a sudden, brutal storm unleashed its fury. Thunder cracked like the world was breaking, and the freezing rain fell as sharp, relentless needles. Seeking refuge, he stumbled upon a small, solitary forge. Inside, it was a different world. An old, weather-beaten blacksmith was striking a bar of glowing red iron. And then, Sila heard it. A rhythm so terrifyingly consistent, it defied the chaos outside. While the mountain screamed and the storm howled with unpredictable rage, the blacksmith's hammer struck the iron with an unbreakable, mathematical precision. Tung, 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 tung. In that terrifying clarity, Sila realized something profound. The blacksmith wasn't fighting the storm. His practice, his discipline, was the storm. It was an unstoppable force of nature, an ancient rhythm that could not be interrupted by any worldly distraction. The hammer's strike was the heartbeat of the mountain itself. Chapter 3: The Secret of Zero Gaps. The forge felt like a temple, and the blacksmith its high priest. As the old man finally laid down his hammer, the silence that followed was heavier than the storm. He looked at Sila with eyes that had seen 1,000 winters and whispered, "The secret is not in the strength of the blow, but in the absence of the gap. We call it Gyooji, the practice that sustains itself." Sila stood frozen as the old man continued, "Most men fail because they leave a crack in their soul. A single second of hesitation is where the frost enters. A single day of 'not today' is where the iron dies. If you want to master the stone, you must understand that the hammer is not a tool you pick up. It is an extension of your very breath. You don't strike because you feel like it. You strike because you are the strike. To leave a gap is to invite the ghost of your old self back into the room. In this forge and in your life, there is no tomorrow. There is only the continuous, unbreakable now. Chapter 4: Killing the Old Identity. Sila returned to his studio not as a dreamer, but as a silent executioner. He looked at the dust-covered marble, the symbol of his repeated surrenders, and felt a cold, sharp resolve. He didn't just want to change, he wanted to destroy the version of himself that knew how to quit. He gathered his friends, his rivals, and the city's harshest critics into his dusty sanctuary. Standing before a massive, untouched block of stone, his voice cut through the air like a blade. "This statue will be finished in 90 suns. If I fail to strike this stone even once, if I allow a single gap to enter my spirit, I will burn this studio to the ground. I will break my tools, and I will never call myself a sculptor again." The room gasped. They called him mad, obsessive, and broken. But Sila only smiled. By turning his private struggle into a public death sentence, he had killed the bridge behind him. He was no longer a man trying to work. He was a man whose very survival depended on the next strike. Chapter 5: The Iron Hour. 4 a.m. The clock struck 4, and the world was a frozen void. In this silent abyss, Sila found his iron hour. While the rest of the city lay buried under warm blankets and soft excuses, Sila stood alone in the dark, cold studio. There was no applause here, no critics to watch him, no social media to like his struggle. There was only the bone-chilling air and the heavy, unyielding silence of the stone. His mind, like a desperate lawyer, began to argue. You're exhausted. Your hands are blistered. 1 hour of extra sleep won't kill the dream. But Sila didn't listen. He had removed the power of choice. He didn't wait for motivation. He simply showed up as an instrument of fate. In the flickering candlelight, the first strike of the hammer shattered the silence, a declaration of war against his own weakness. This was the solitude of discipline. It wasn't about being seen by the world. It was about who you became when the world was looking away. Chapter 6. The Biology of Resistance. By the third week, the honeymoon phase of motivation had withered into a brutal war of attrition. Sila's body was no longer a willing partner. It was a rebel. His muscles screamed with every movement, and his hands, once soft, were now a map of raw blisters and cracked skin. This is the death zone, the biological barrier where 99% of humans surrender. His brain, designed for survival and comfort, unleashed a toxic flood of rationalizations. You are overtraining. This isn't discipline, it's self-destruction. Rest today or you'll break forever. The pain wasn't just physical, it was a psychological siege. But Sila looked at his trembling hands and remembered the blacksmith's whisper. He realized that this pain was the smell of his old self dying. He didn't fight the exhaustion, he wore it like armor. He knew that if he could outlast the rebellion of his own cells, he would cross into a realm where willpower was no longer needed. Chapter 7. The River's Strategy. On the 45th day, the unthinkable happened. Sila was struck by a fever so violent it felt like his bones were turning to ash. He couldn't lift the heavy hammer. He could barely even stand. The old Sila would have surrendered, calling it a valid excuse. But he remembered the river. A river doesn't stop being a river just because of a drought. It might shrink to a tiny, invisible trickle, but as long as the water moves, the flow remains unbroken. Sila dragged his shivering body to the stone. He didn't strike with power. Instead, he took a small chisel and made a single, microscopic scratch on the marble. It was a victory of spirit over matter. He realized that the goal wasn't to finish the statue that day, it was to keep the gap from opening. Continuity is the ultimate power. 1% is infinitely better than 0, because 0 is where the ghost of failure lives. By making that one tiny scratch, Sila kept the river of his discipline flowing through the desert of his pain. Chapter 8. Predeciding the Battle. Sila realized that willpower was a finite resource, a candle that could be blown out by the unexpected winds of life. To protect his iron hour, he became a grand master of his own fate. He didn't wait for obstacles to appear. He hunted them down in his mind and solved them before they ever existed. He created iron laws for every possible betrayal of his environment. If the power goes out, I will carve by the light of a single candle. If I am forced to travel, I will carry a fragment of stone in my pocket to strike. If a guest stays at my home, I will wake at 3 a.m. to finish my work before they even open their eyes. He removed the burden of decision-making from his future self. When chaos arrived, Sila didn't think. He simply executed a pre-written command. By deciding today how he would fight tomorrow, he turned his discipline into an automated fortress, a machine that could not be bargained with because the deal had already been signed in blood. Chapter 9. The Ghost Mode. Automation. By the 70th day, something supernatural occurred. The war inside Sila's head had ended, replaced by a haunting, rhythmic peace. He had entered Ghost Mode, a state where the practice continues itself, without the need for a conscious commander. He would wake up at 4 a.m. before the alarm even whispered. His feet touched the cold floor, his hands gripped the hammer, and the first strike landed before his mind was even fully awake. He was no longer a man forcing a habit, he was the habit itself. When his friends visited, they stood in the doorway, frozen in fear. They didn't see the Sila they once knew, the one who procrastinated and made excuses. They saw a ghost moving with terrifying, silent precision. His eyes were focused on a world they couldn't see, and his movements were as fluid as a dancer, yet as heavy as a mountain. To the world, his discipline looked like a prison, but to Sila, It was the only place where he was truly free. He had transcended willpower. He had become unbreakable. Chapter 10. Rebirth of the Unbreakable. The 90th sunrise arrived, not with a bang, but with a profound golden silence. The masterpiece was finished. The angel of resilience stood tall, carved from a stone that everyone said was too hard to shape. Sila stood before it, but he didn't look like a man who had just finished a job. He looked like a man who had been reborn. His hands were scarred, his body was lean, but his eyes held the fire of a god. The world saw the statue, but Sila saw the death of his old, mediocre self. And here's the secret that terrified everyone. On the 91st day, at 4 a.m., the sound of the hammer struck again. Success was never the destination. The unbreakable path was. Sila didn't do it for the art anymore. He was the art. Now, the question is for you, watching this. Are you tired of your half-finished dreams? Are you ready to kill the person who makes excuses? The Gyooji system is not about being a better person. It's about becoming a different person. Someone the world looks at and says, "That's not normal." And when you hear those words, you'll know you finally arrived.